Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining me for a brief discussion really on Marine Corps state of recruiting. So I'm Brigadier General David Hyman, the Commanding General of Marine Corps Recruiting, as you are, Western Recruiting Region here in San Diego, and the Marine Corps Recruit Depot San Diego here. Some of you may be looking for force design. I am sad to disappoint. The big dogs, the main draw is probably next door. But if you want to hear a little bit about recruiting and what we do at the Marine Corps Recruit Depot San Diego, and writ large in terms of state of recruiting in the Marine Corps, you're in the right spot. So thank you for being here. So what I'd like to do is describe a little bit about the current military recruiting environment that's germane to all the Marine Corps, the U.S. military services. And then I'll talk a little bit about, what made us successful in 25 and where we're trending for 26. And then we'll talk a little bit more about, what makes us different as a Marine Corps. And then I'll discuss a little bit about what are our future challenges as I see them. Let's see if we get this right. Okay, so first and foremost, there's a lot to unpack here in just one short slide. But I would tell you that first bullet is one that I'll probably talk a little bit about just so you can understand today's youth, especially when we have discussion about those who are eligible and those who are propense and those who want to serve, right? So firstly, in order to have military recruitment, it takes two attributes simultaneously. A young man or woman who has a desire to serve, we call that propensity. And then obviously a young man or woman who meets the eligibility requirements. So we'll first start talking about the piece about the desire to serve propensity. The second part, before we jump into that, is when it comes to measuring eligibility and measuring propensity, the Department of War has an agency dedicated to conducting the polls annually and quarterly called a Joint Advertising, Marketing, and Research Service, or surveys. So they collect all the data and inform the different services in terms of the propensity who want to enlist or may want to enlist, officers and enlisted. And they also help us determine the market share within the military services, what's appropriate, who wants to enlist in whatever service may be. So on the topic of propensity, this one typically garners some questions, so I can field those questions. But at the very least, it should garner a little bit of retrospection or some discussion amongst yourselves or thoughts about where we're headed as a nation, right? Of those young men and women who want to serve and what creates a desire for a young man or woman to want to serve. So up front, propensity, when we say American youth, those who want to serve is declining. So the statistic is in 2003, there was 16% of youth ages 16 to 21 that wanted to serve. In year 2024, that has now dropped to 10%. So over the course of 2 decades, we have seen a decline in young men and women who desire to serve. And there's any number of factors, individual factors, societal factors, family factors that contribute to that. Today's brief, I will not try to attempt to solve that riddle. But it's one that certainly could use some additional studies from the different groups that are out there. Also, when we talk about the propensity to serve, influencers, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, also have a role to play. So when we talk about fewer adults are recommending service to young men and women, that is, for the most part, remained constant over the last 2 decades. However, it's still less than 50% of adults who want to recommend young men and women either serve or what service to serve in. And I'll talk a little bit about where the Marine Corps is, but again, I just wanted to give a little bit more of the macro view, if you will, across all military services and the challenges that each of us face. So the second bullet there, it talks about the shrinking pool. So right now, we would say there's about 23% of young men and women within the eligibility range that actually meet qualifications to enlist in today's military. So there's any number of factors that lead to that, but the primary factors when we talk about those who are eligible to enlist, we're looking at age between 18 and 28 without any type of waivers. Are those a citizenship or a registered permanent residence? Medical, is it a significant contributing factor for disqualification rate? At any rate, once you get through the qualified population and nick it down to eligibility based upon those who can meet the criteria, the challenge every service faces is that we're all fighting for that same 23%. And while if you look at the studies will show in 2013, it was 23% was the same challenge that all the services faced. What's different today is while the eligibility rate has remained fairly constant, the propensity is the factor today that we didn't have to contend with almost 2 decades ago, dropping from 16% who want to serve, and now we have 10% that want to serve. So those two combined create the challenge for each of the services. And so that 23% gets into the third bullet. This is the competition for entry-level employees. So all of the services, as I mentioned, are fighting for that same qualified men and women that can serve, that 23%. But civilian corporations, private industry, defense industry, they have a larger pool from which they can recruit. And of course, they have incentive models and bonus models similar to what you see in the military. And they also have models, some of their education benefits as well, for the entry-level employees, very similar to what the DoD has. And so when we talk about, how DoD, the military writ large, the Department of War rather, is crowded out based upon some of the aggressive recruiting and advertising from our civilian sector, it's definitely a factor we have to contend with, let alone compete with each other, whether it's the Army or the Air Force, the Marines, and the Navy. And last one is societal perceptions and behaviors that we all face. And so we think, or I would say the societal perceptions and behaviors are those things that lead and feed the notion of propensity, right? So recent polls suggest that the confidence in the United States government has changed over the last 20 years. I think the recent Gallup poll has, for most Americans, confidence in the military has dropped from 82% in 2009 to 62% in 2025. And again, any number of factors contribute to that. And it's certainly not a political statement. A lot of our institutions, today's youth, are questioning what used to be norms, whether it be civic institutions, college, or attending college for that part, and then the preferences by the recruitable population. Some just may change and may want to do something different. What drew a different generation of men and women to join the military may not be the same driving factors for today's youth. We still see today's youth desire a sense of purpose and a sense of belonging. But what's at the top of the list for a lot of young men and women across all services are a lot of the tangible benefits. Many want to join for the pay and the benefits, the same drivers for folks looking for jobs today in the civilian corporations. So despite these challenges, I would tell you the Marine Corps has continued to persist. We have made our mission, our recruiting mission, every year since 1994. These are real challenges that the Marine Corps faced over the last few years, rebounding after the global pandemic and the implementation of some of the military health services, our screening that we have done. But despite all of that, the Marine Corps continues to achieve its recruiting mission. And what we believe that sets us apart, and we'll talk about this later, is that the intangibles still resonate for young men and women, despite 72% say they want to join the military because of pay and the tangible benefits. When we talk about the differentiation in this market space, military recruiting, I'll talk a little bit about it later, is we think the fact that our intangibles of self-discipline, self-reliance, dependability, sacrifice, discipline, those intangible qualities are still what drive young men and women to want to become Marines. Bottom line, the recruiting crisis, some people call it crisis, it's just a period of time we've all gone through. Don't necessarily believe it's only or exclusive to the military. I think society at large, when they talk about this generational patterns of reduced institutional engagement. So this next slide here talks a little bit about what informs the propensity of young men and women to enlist. So I'm starting with the influencers, because still what we're talking about, 17 to 21-year-olds contemplating joining the U.S. military. So many of them, it to be expected, will turn to adults or influencers in their life. Influencers can be teachers, coaches, parents, and anybody really that can help a young man and woman contemplate whether or not they want to join the United States military. You'll notice in blue is the percentage of those adults who are likely to recommend service. And in red, the adults that recommend a young man or woman actually join. You'll notice over the last 2 decades, it's remained fairly constant. There's been ebbs and flows in terms of missions across the services, but based upon the polling over the last 2 decades, it's remained constant. What's not depicted on the slide, on the graphic rather, but I have in a call-out box, is 30% have responded they are very likely or likely to recommend a young man and woman join the Marine Corps. And then 44% are likely or very likely to support a young man and woman's decision once they join the Marine Corps. The interesting thing about it that's not captured in the slide is 50% of adults would recommend the Marine Corps to a youth, a young man or woman who are athletic, honorable, in need of structure and discipline. And that's based upon the views and the perceptions of the Marine Corps. And so when we talk about, hey, the influencers carry a lot of value in terms of recommendations for young men and women to make a decision to join, many of the influencers, not for bad, they view that they want the young man or woman to have a career that's providing a good living, job security, an environment that's safe and supports their mental wellness, and opportunity to use their talents and abilities as most important. Obviously, joining the military is we like to view from the Marine Corps lens, is doing hard things in hard places. And so some of those, that's a tension there between what adults see or influencers see as a future state for this man or woman, and what they know is going to be expected of that young adult if they join the United States military. So this next slide actually dives down a little bit deeper into the actual services. So it depicts a likelihood to support an active duty service broken down by each service. So I'll jump to the very bottom. You can see there's a trend line for the Marine Corps in red. 44% of influencers responded by saying they're likely or very likely to support a youth's decision to join the Marine Corps. This is the lowest of all the branches. And no surprise if you think back to what I mentioned earlier about influencers wanting a way of life for a young man or woman. And if they have this perceived understanding or impression of the Marine Corps is doing difficult things in hard places, high likelihood of injury or dangerous conditions, it stands to reason then that most would not recommend the Marine Corps for the youth to join. Influencers associate the Marine Corps with becoming physically stronger, working as a team, and serving as a protector of one's country. And if you think about the Marine Corps' brand, it's somewhere in there. The Marine Corps' mantra is there, right? And so influencers tend not to value patriotic or achievement-based values, such as serving as a protector of one's country, becoming physically stronger, or working for an elite organization. That's the Marine Corps. And so these statistics would suggest that consistent over the years is we have a fairly favorable view of us as a military force, but likely not a favorable view as, hey, this is what we want for young men and women to join. But when they do make that decision to join, the support for them when they make a decision to join grows from 30% not likely to recommend service to 44% likely to support their decision to join the Marine Corps. And one of the challenges we see when it comes to influencers recommending is the gap. We see that within the Department of War, and the studies would suggest that the closer you are to the military, i.e. veterans, family members of veterans, you are more likely to recommend military service. And 40% of the youth in 1995 answered that they had a parent in the United States military. In the year 2022, it has dropped from 40% to only 12%. The challenge with that is, while we believe that folks closer to the military will have a favorable recommendation for military service in terms of consideration, as those connected to the military, the numbers start to dwindle. And when I say dwindle, we think about those who come from the military and have children in the military or come from a military family. As the pool of Americans gets deeper as far as a slice who serve in their family and the next generation serves, as opposed to getting wider, it will present a challenge that every service is going to have to contend with if we rely on those influencers who have previous military experience, are affiliated with the military, are the influencers who are most likely to recommend young men and women serve in the military. But we don't rest with that as a Marine Corps. These are areas of opportunities for us. So one of the areas we try to invest in terms of trying to change the influencers is every year we bring educators from across, we invite educators from across the United States, high school and colleges, to revisit Marine Corps Recruit Depot, San Diego or Parris Island, or for our college professors to even go to Officer Candidate School for 3 to 5 days to really take a peek behind the curtain. And we don't target really to invite people who are believers in serving. What we try to do is invite folks who may not have any affiliation with the Marine Corps or the military to at least come take a look, walk in the shoes of a young man and woman when they decide to join, of what it's like. The whole intent of these types of workshops is to create a population out there who at the very least may not walk a young man or woman down to the recruiter's office, but at least could answer questions based upon their experience with the military, or at least their exposure to the military, so that they can make the young man or woman can make an informed decision based upon the influencers that they go to for advice. All right. Earlier, I talked about 2 attributes that you needed. You needed somebody who wants to join the military, and you also need folks who are eligible to join. So this slide kind of walks us through how do we get to this 23%. So in the bottom left corner are the 5 major criteria that we use across all services. Again, age. Every service can set waiver criteria, but the eligible age population, 17 to 24. You go up to 28. And some services you can go up to older than 28. And then education. So each of the services, by standards, we look to find young men and women who have a high school diploma as a requirement, GED or another equivalent. And each young man or woman who joins the military must reach a minimum qualifying score on the Armed Service Vocational Aptitude Battery Test. And then also, they must pass medical and physical requirements. Some of those range depending on the service you want to join or the profession that you may want to do, but there's a standard baseline for young men and women to have to meet in terms of the physical standards. And when I mean physical, I'm talking about the medical screening more so than, and height and weight more so than somebody who can pass a physical readiness test. That comes later. And then lastly is the the moral qualifications. So all of the services have their standards. So police involvement, we encourage young men and women to disclose that. So there may be a bar for entry depending on what type of misconduct that you have been involved with. And it's not so much a judgment of the incidents or the activity that you've demonstrated or engaged in previously, but we're trying to assess is the character of the young man and woman. And so that's why the other two subcategories are there, drug use and tattoos. Drug use in and of itself is disqualifying, but over years, some drugs are more recreational now and more prominent throughout various states. And so that's an area where our federal government, or at least the military, has looked at it, still prohibited, and it's still a disqualifying factor for service. But each service has an opportunity to establish what their waiver criteria is. We'll talk a little bit about the Marine Corps, and every service has, like I said, their own standards. And we'll talk about some of our standards in the Marine Corps. Tattoos, extremely prevalent. I've been on recruiting duty twice now, once in 2009 and 2012, and the landscape of tattoos and the number of men and women with tattoos has grown exponentially. I remember not being able to enlist or get a waiver for a tattoo over 10 years ago. Today, it's acceptable. I waive it. Not in terms of the standards, but what we look at is a whole person concept. And because society, where these young men and women, they are drawn from the use or the tattooing or the exercise and body art is a common theme for men and women today, more so than it was yesterday. So in the larger pie chart, what that is that's our disqualifying rates, or disqualifier rates, and you can see that. I won't go to each one of those, but there it tells you how many young men and women who go to military entrance processing station to enlist in any of the services, what they're being disqualified for. And you can see the largest slice of the pie there, they're being disqualified for multiple things. Somebody could have moral disqualifiers, police involvement, drug use, also have a history of whatever medical condition that may be disqualifying, any number of things. It's typically not one sole thing that disqualifies someone from joining or enlisting in the military. But as I said earlier, I think it's important to note that, again, this 23% is the same as it's been since 2013. But what's different now is the propensity has dropped slightly today. But again, that 23% is what every service in the military is fighting for, period. I also mentioned earlier about the entry-level competitors out here. There's a larger pool, as I mentioned, that civilian corporations and companies can draw from, whereas the military, we're looking principally at the 23%. And so these are a few headlines, not bad ways. There's just headlines from these companies that are also like looking to fill their ranks with folks in their workforce, and also the evolution of some of the competitive bonuses that are out there, signing bonuses, education benefits, as I mentioned earlier. And so right now we still have, I think what the job market is fairly stable today. The unemployment rates are lower, which is good. That means folks who find a job are probably staying in a job, but there's a small slice of folks who are looking for jobs, and the military may or may not be an option depending on their influencers of whatever societal changes. But again, those same folks who may be eligible, meet the eligibility to join, these are also the military's competitors, or at least a snapshot of the competitors that are out there. And it's all not for naught. So we like to also believe that, yes, a young man and woman can join a company or corporation as an entry-level employee, but somehow that young man and woman was probably searching for something else. So when a recruiter walks into Best Buy or whatever store that it may be, and they see a young man or woman working, a recruiter, you can probably guarantee they're going to ask them, how long have you been working here? What are you Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Are you satisfied with what you're doing? What other interests do you may have? So it's a prospecting field for us. So we don't view them as solely competitors that they'll never have an opportunity to join the Marine Corps. But it just so happens to show that, hey, when it comes to entry-level employees, these companies are also trying to find the young men and women that are also not going to college and who may be leaving high school and entering the workforce. All right, so now that I've walked through a little bit of the recruiting environment and some of the challenges that we have, I'll quickly give an update on where we are in terms of the state of Marine Corps recruiting. So I would say first and foremost, we continue to make mission. We made mission in fiscal year 25, and I won't go through all the statistics there, but we've made mission our annual accession goals every year since 1994. And fiscal year 25 was no different. I will talk a little bit about some of what I believe contributed to that success in FY25. But I also like to lean forward and say FY26, fiscal year 26, that we're on track to make mission again this year. But I think it's important to also note not just your accession goals. Every year we have our requirement to meet. Last year it was 31,200 Marines to assess. But part of that also, their goal is also to set the stage and set positive conditions for the next fiscal year. So when we entered fiscal year 26, we had 38% of our start pool, and those are young men and women that have enlisted, that are in our delayed entry program, that are waiting to go to recruit training. What that does is that it creates a standoff for the service to better prepare young men and women for the rigors of recruit training, both physically and mentally. And that's an exponential increase from fiscal year 24, 10%, as a matter of fact, from 24 start pool to fiscal year, 24, from 25 to go into 26. So 38% start pool going into fiscal year 26 is a pretty significant milestone achievement for the service. Now, with all candor, that 38% was on the backs of recruiters, but it was also a result of our service made significant progress when it came to retention. So the ability to meet in strength is factored in by accessions as well as retention. Our successful retention in fiscal year 25 meant that we had a number of young men and women who were Marines who wanted to stay Marine, and we kept them in the service. We kept faith with them, which reduced our fiscal year 25 accession goals. So those young men and women who were supposed to go to recruit training in August or September of 25, we moved them into October and November of 25 in order to increase our start pool going into the fiscal year. So again, the recruiters did phenomenal work, but to be truthful and candid and transparent, the number, the 38%, was also a direct result of our retention success in fiscal year 25. So in the yellow, the call-out box at the bottom, when people say, hey, how did you compare to other services or your own services, how were you successful in 25? And I will say up front, the recruiters fight for the existence of the Marine Corps. Our Commandant and his Commandant's planning guidance talked about there's nothing more existential to the Corps than our recruiting and our retention. And every single day, where recruiters across every zip code in the United States is looking for talented young men and women to join our service and become a Marine, because without them, the Marine Corps does not exist. The lifeblood of our Marine Corps flows through the dedication, hard work, and the efforts of recruiters on the street today. Second, the increased recruiter strength. So our leadership, our Commandant, realized and made recruiting one of his priorities. And in order to make sure that we continue to find talented young men and women, that we can be selective about who we want to bring into the Marine Corps, increase the number of recruiters to get out there to meet our in-strength goals, or at least our accession goals for FY25. And partly associated with that is also the structure changes that happened. So there's the demographics of the United States. The population has shifted from certain areas and states across the Union towards the smiling South and the Southeast and the Southwest. And so what we decided to do as a Marine Corps was move to where the puck was going. So when I say structure changes, I mean we closed some of our recruiting stations and moved some of our recruiting offices into different areas and opened up new stations where there was 2 recruiting stations based upon the population and the trends. Maybe there's 3 recruiting stations because there's the assets that are there. When I say assets, the high schools are there, the population trends and movement across the United States. So we like to say we tried to move where the puck was going to get ahead, as opposed to waiting every 10 years for the census to drive where we should move. At that point, the census is a lagging indicator when it comes to recruiting. So those are the 2 major changes that contributed, I think, to the success in 25. Also, I mentioned earlier about the FY25 retention bump that we got for our start pool. And lastly, the Marine Corps, from our commandant down, puts a premium on selecting leaders of the recruiting force. So we are highly selective about who we screen and select and assign to be an enlisted recruiter or an officer recruiter. But what we guarantee those men and women who are going to go out there and fight for the existence of the Corps is that they're going to be best led. So we spend the time to carefully select proven leaders at every echelon. And I'll talk about that on the next slide. And I would tell you, if you look at the general officer population in the Marine Corps, at any given time, there's about a third of general officers on active duty that have recruiting experience. All right, I mentioned earlier about the structure. It's probably difficult to see here, but there are 3, as an example, there are 3 recruiting stations that we opened since fiscal year 2022. We opened up a recruiting station in Austin, a recruiting station in South Texas, and a recruiting station in Tampa. Now, some of you have been around the Marine Corps for a while. You may remember there used to be a recruiting station in Tampa. True, we closed that station down based upon demographic shifting, and we opened up recruiting station in Orlando. But based upon the population trends, we opened up another recruiting station back in Tampa because that's where the puck is going in order to make sure that the recruiters that are out there recruiting are going to be successful. Also, when I mentioned about the structure or the additional recruiters, at the top right, we have about 3,700 recruiters today. It ranged as high as 4,000 recruiters that were out there above our authorized strength. So the commandant decided deliberately, I'm going to give you more recruiters than what we've paid for. We'll assume some risk in other areas, but it's that important that it's one of the priorities for the Marine Corps that I'm going to assign you more recruiters to ensure we make mission. And over the years, some of those recruiters will go back, but we have adjusted our table of organization to grow appropriately. So at 3,700, not all of them will, not all that structure will go back. Some of that will remain on recruiting duty based upon structure increase for recruiting. And lastly, at the bottom, I mentioned in yellow the call out where I said leaders. So the Marine Corps is divided up in 2 recruiting regions, East Coast and West, Parris Island and San Diego. But where the rubber meets the road is where the 6 district commanders are. Those are 6 colonels, all proven successful leaders. Of one as a recruiting station commander at one point. Then they've all recruited at the battalion or squadron level. And now they're back out on recruiting duty as colonels to command their recruiting stations. There are 48 recruiting stations across the United States. And each one of those majors that are out there, highly qualified, proven leaders, special selection, a lot of time and effort and consideration goes into who we're going to select and slate out there to lead our Marines on recruiting duty. And again, as illustrated by the number of senior general officers in our Corps today with recruiting experience. And that's a promise that our commandant has given to every Marine, is not only am I going to give you a mission, a tough mission to go recruit, but I'm going to give you the best leaders the Marine Corps has to lead you in this effort. All right, so bringing it down to the micro level at the individual recruiter, there's a lot of work that goes into finding men and women who want to join the Marine Corps. This snapshot, the numbers reflect the data analysis from my headquarters of the Western Recruiting Region. At Western Recruiting Region, we are responsible for enlisted recruiting and officer recruiting generally west of the Mississippi, so 2/3 of the United States. And so that's what these numbers reflect. So at the top left, again, are the 5 eligibility criteria we use. And they are prominent throughout the entire screening and prospecting and recruiting process. So in order to meet our session requirement for the Western Recruiting Region, which this year is about 15,000 sessions, it means the recruiters assigned to Western Recruiting Region need to make over 1.1 million contacts with young men and women, regardless if they want to join the Marine Corps or not. So they have to go search in the contact layer, forward edge, in every zip code to find young men and women who may be interested. And even if they're not interested, the job of a recruiter perhaps is to make them interested. But also we need to make sure that we talk to every young man and woman because we want access to the maximum available pool of talented Americans possible. And so as we go through the context, we talk to everybody that meet certain criteria. Obviously, if they're beyond the age of 28 to 24, the recruiter may not want to spend too much time trying to talk to them about joining. But there are times when a recruiter may talk to a coach or a teacher as an influencer. But for the most part, the recruiters got to talk. The recruiters, I have about 1,500 that are assigned to me, make 1.1 million contacts. From there, they're going to make 200,000 appointments. How they make the appointments is they're going to screen those contacts through those 5 eligibility criteria. And once they find a young man or woman who meets the bare minimum criteria, then they're going to set an appointment. And the appointment is, hey, that young man or woman, let's come into the office and let's have a discussion about maybe what your interests are and maybe what you want to do, where you can see yourself in the future, so on and so forth. From that point, they're going to go down from 220,000 to about 89,000 interviews. These interviews, when we talk about interviews, that's a young man or woman who has sat down, who's been screened, so they meet basic eligibility. They've sat down with a Marine recruiter and said, hey, I'm interested. I've talked about where my personal goals are. The recruiter has shown them how the Marine Corps probably helped get them to some of their personal goals and talk about some of our attributes as a Marine. And from that point, at the end of the interview, that's a young man or woman who says, yes, I want to move further and I want to join the Marine Corps. From that 89,000, as you were, from the interviews, we get 31,000. That 31,000 are the folks who are actually commit to saying yes. We lose a percentage from those who say, I want to do it, to saying, hey, next week, you and me are going to go down to the MEPS, the Military Insurance Processing Station, and for one reason or the other, somebody can change their mind. They're under no contract, no obligation to do so. So we do lose quite a few. But once they go down to the Military Insurance Processing Station, they are screened, they are committed to joining the Marine Corps, and now they need to go to MEPS in order to be medically qualified to determine whether or not they meet medical qualifications. Of that 18,000 that actually enlist, that represents 1% of that 1.1 million people that the recruiters originally talked to. And so that 18,000, once they meet all the eligibility requirements, they meet the physical requirements, they are now in the delayed entry program. They have a scheduled date that they want to go to recruit training. They have a program that's assigned. And for the next month, 3 months, 6 months, they are now in our delayed entry program where the Marine recruiters are preparing them for the next phase of their transformation to become a Marine. So that's how we get the 15,000 accessions every year. Now, there's a box around the Enlist Delayed Entry Program and the accessions, and underneath that it says the MEPCOM partnership. So the United States Military Entrance Processing Command is the front door of freedom, as they say. No young man or woman can join the military or enlist in the military or commission in the military without passing through the gates of a local MEP station. Those are our partners. They're a critical capability that we all need in order to meet our accession goals. And again, that partnership means we have our liaisons that are working in the MEPS offices to help with the screening and making sure the young men and women, before they go off to recruit training, at least at Marine Corps Recruit Depot San Diego, that they are making sure that they meet all the requirements, because we certainly have our attrition here at Recruit Depot San Diego, but we want to ensure that, hey, if somebody doesn't meet the standards or some reason should not be a Marine, that they don't ship to recruit training. Because once they ship to recruit training, our job at recruit training is to train them as Marines. They now have enlisted in the United States Marine Corps to become a United States Marine. So on average, we have about 17 to 20% every year, once they enlist and come into our delayed entry program, that don't ship to recruit training. That's our attrition from our delayed entry program. In that bottom left is a pie chart that describes the primary reasons why young men and women decide to change their mind. So in order to get into the delayed entry program, they'll raise their right hand one time. But if a young man or woman decides to change their mind and not want to become a Marine because they want to go to college, or somehow they become disqualified, they got more tattoos than what they were authorized to meet the requirements, or somehow they were involved in drugs or drug use that they shouldn't, or somehow they don't finish their high school education. Now we cannot send them to recruit training because they have failed to meet the enlistment criteria. They met the criteria to enlist in the delayed entry program, but in order to raise their hand the second time and become a United States Marine, that means they have met all the requirements and they come to recruit training. So about 17 to 20% annually don't actually meet the requirements. And sometimes that's okay. They attempted to earn or get on their way to becoming a Marine. But that's a healthy level of attrition, quite frankly, for those young women who may not have the full commitment to become a Marine. All right, so what makes the Marine Corps recruiting different? As mentioned earlier, with the fewer young Americans likely to join the military and few influencers recommending service to the Marine Corps continues to draw the right person at the right time who want to serve for the right purpose. We continue in our recruiting efforts to focus on the intangibles. That's not to suggest that the Marine Corps doesn't have enlistment bonuses, but we just rely on these far less than what we do when it comes to those intangible qualities that we're looking for a young man or woman. I mention that because I'll go through the stream of pictures there, because how do you go from what you see in the top left of the pictures with a recruiter and a young man or woman in a classroom to what you see at the bottom right, which is a Navy Cross recipient, now retired Sergeant Major Brad Castle, for what he did in the Battle of Fallujah. How does that happen? It doesn't happen because of bonuses. It doesn't happen because you're signing up for the benefits. You get to this point where you believe in self-service or service to others. You put others above yourself and you serve something greater than yourself, part of a team. And that's why the recruiting force in the Marine Corps continues to focus on the intangibles like pride of belonging, the challenge, self-confidence, and young men and women who are searching for self-direction. We also double down on, we talk about that transformation, right? So nobody joins the Marine Corps, just the military for a job. We believe that young men and women who want to become a United States Marine have to fundamentally go through a transformation process. It starts with the recruiter, it continues in the delayed entry program, and it doesn't stop when they graduate from Recruit Depot San Diego or Parris Island. That transformation process is part of a very deliberate 6-phase transformation that in the end, allows us to fulfill our promise to make Marines win our nation's battles and return quality citizens. So the Marine Corps, the Marine leaders, staff NCOs, and officers are committed to sustaining the transformation, but a young man and woman also, once they become a Marine, have to be committed to sustaining the transformation as well. In our warrior ethos, founded on the discipline and our core values of honor, courage, and commitment, is a differentiation between us and that crowded market space when we talk about the 23%. What makes us different from the other services? Hey, look, I'm about as purple as you can get, and look to join any fight that we'll ever fight in as a Marine Corps is going to be part of a joint force. But it takes a special human, a special character to sign and want to become a United States Marine. And it's no surprise that there's a lower propensity of young men and women who want to join the Marine Corps, let alone influencers who want to recommend somebody join the Marine Corps. And that's okay, because part of our brand is we do hard things in hard places. And we can be selective with who we allow join and become part of our ranks. But once a young man and woman decides and makes a commitment to us, we then make a commitment to them to take them through that delayed entry program and prepare them for what they're going to encounter at Recruit Depot San Diego. So when the time comes to serve this nation and to serve their brothers and sisters in a forward deployed environment, whether at crisis or contingency, that there's a young man and woman in a classroom today that will perform heroic acts just the same as Sergeant Major Castle did in the Battle of Fallujah in 2004. And what underscores all of this is our ruthless adherence to standards. As our Commandant has said in many different forums, you join us, we don't join you. That's not being egotistical or arrogant. That just means we have high standards and we're going to hold everybody, whether you're a general officer down to the private, to these same standards. And we're going to take special time and screen those who are going to lead Marines and send an officer candidate school in order to provide the best example possible, which is just leadership by example, by adhering to our standards, knowing our standards, and enforcing those standards and being the standard. That's just who we are. For many of us in the Marine Corps, our standards are our true north. That doesn't mean that we have a zero defect mentality or approach to times when young Marines wind up going wayward or fall off and make poor choices. What that means is we hold to our standard because winning our nation's battles depends on adhering to our standards. That's why we do it. Our future challenges. So many of these aren't new to any of the military services, unique to the Marine Corps. As we evolve and we leverage technology and innovation, we have our recruiting information support system today. It's a legacy system. We are trying to get it online and meet our Department of War information assurance requirements. And it needs to be more agile. And so as we roll that out and implement that over the next several years, just like with any implementation of new technology, sometimes, not always, sometimes it can be a little clunky. So as you roll out, or you have one existing system and you fold in or you integrate the new system, and a lot of times it requires a bottom-up feedback for those who are using the system. So that's just some space that we're navigating through to make sure it doesn't impact how we make Marines. And we want to ensure that this system talks to the other various systems that we have in the Marine Corps, from our training to our retention, so on and so forth. Just like every other service, predictable and sustainable resourcing is a thing in order to set conditions for us to be successful both on recruiting and in the battlefields of tomorrow. So marketing and advertising, if you think about that, that means setting conditions, the deep fight. I'll give you an example. Recently, I was at a Marine Corps Recruit Depot San Diego graduation. I had the opportunity to talk to a parent, a father, and I asked him, I said, "Sir, when did you know your daughter wanted to be a Marine?" And his answer to me was, ever since she was 8 years old. She came home with a pencil, as simple as a pencil, that said a United States Marine, and the seed was planted. And there are stories told every graduation when I talk or the team talks to parents and family members, how long has a family member wanted to be a Marine? And they talk about it was a commercial that they saw when they were in high school. They talk about they went to a clinic and they saw a Marine recruiter out there doing a combat fitness test with my college football team. And that just inspired me because they also spent some time talking about leadership. So when we talk about marketing and advertising, that isn't necessarily directly tied to somebody who's 17 to 21-year-old today. It can. But quite frankly, that's to also influence the influencers and the next generation who may, when they reach that age to contemplate military service, that they remember what they heard or what they saw when they talked to somebody about the Marine Corps. We talked about this generation, the propensity to enlist, and some of the perceptions from the influencers. The bullets there, approximately 50% of youth never considered joining the military. And that's been constant, and that's okay. Today, there's 1% who are willing to shoulder that burden. And that's okay. It's part of us having an all-volunteer force. And they say the top reason for joining is their pay and educational benefits, 72% across all military services. I put that out there because that's still a leading indicator as why somebody who wants to sit down and talk to a Marine recruiter. The challenge for us as Marine recruiters, as I mentioned earlier, we're still going to focus on the intangibles. We will tell a young man or woman that, hey, look, if you want to join, you want to do it for the pay and the benefits, that's great. But eventually, the bonus that you receive this year and you get the following year, that money's going to run out. And there's going to be a Marine to the left or right of you doing hard things in hard places that's going to rely on you as a fellow Marine to lead them and be an example for them. And so in order to serve others and be part of a team and get through, as Marines like to say, that shared hardship of suffering, it's the focus on the intangibles is where the Marine Corps recruiting continues to sustain our success. And that last bullet there for future challenges, in 2008, we saw a decline in the birth rate. So that's going to come out at some point. So there's a projected 13% decline of Americans who are going to turn 18 in the years between 2025 and 2041. So as the propensity declines, and we're already fighting for the remaining 23%, and if we have a fewer or less population between 18 and 21, that's just a challenge that all the services are going to have to contend with going into the future recruiting environment. So ladies and gentlemen, I spent some time kind of covering a wide swath, and now I am willing to take any questions if you have them. As a CG of Recruit Depot San Diego and the Western Recruiting Region, I can talk to both. But please, any questions, happy to answer them, or at least attempt to answer them.
Sir, thank you very much for your time and your service. Really appreciate it. I did have a question. What type of predictive data analytics is your command using to accomplish your goals?
So within our Manpower Reserve Affairs section, they're looking at these data analytic tools to inform, again, the get ahead of the puck, follow the puck. But on the street level today, other than drawing on lagging indicators, studies from the jammers, it was a joint advertising marketing research studies. In the hands of the recruiters, not today, we're using them. They are piloting different efforts. Time now in the Marine Corps, a lot of our graduates from the Naval Postgraduate School in our Manpower Reserve off building. But time now at the tactical level, not a lot of data analytics are being used as an indicator, but certainly a lagging indicator.
Thank you, sir. And I was also curious about the MCRISS. What type of impacts has that legacy system had on your command? I imagine that it hasn't been able to just keep up to date with the current demands of your mission.
Yeah, so I think in terms of the demands, in terms of the information volume and serving our need as part of our systematic recruiting program, it's met those needs. What really has happened, just like a lot of companies are faced with in DoD, the information security requirements have increased. And as they increase, the cost of these programs increased. And so instead of continuing to do patchwork on a legacy system, perhaps it's that time that we look at another system in order to continue to put a band-aid on the fix. But the system works fine now, but in order to meet the challenges and the requirements going forward, that's the reason why we're implementing a new system.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Appreciate the presentation. Great numbers. I work for a company called Avature Small Business. We work with Air Force Recruiting Service to provide tools for recruiting and increase the funnel for propensed individuals going into the Air Force. And I was wondering if there was some synergy with the Marines, what we're doing with the Air Force. Who can I talk to try to get those channels?
Yeah, so that's me. We'll probably want to talk afterwards. I do know that at the Department of War level, when they created the recruitment task force, they are looking at certain programs and opportunities out there for this exact reason, right? So all of the military is, challenge looking and competing over the 23%, but there's certain things that we probably shouldn't be fighting each other for. And if there's systems and there's areas that we can create synergy, then we certainly want to explore that. And that Department of War's recruitment task force is helping us with that as well.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Hi, Heather Mangilia with USNI News. So 2 questions for you. The first, I'll try to speak loud because I know I'm short. Thank you. The first is that given what you talked about with propensity, the lack of eligibility, going forward to FY27, FY28, how is Marine Corps going to make sure that they find those people? What are you going to do? What are the tactics that are being used to make sure that you do meet those goals? And then also on the recruiting side, I know that there was a Business Insider piece that came out about suicide within recruiters. So what are you doing to make sure recruiters are supported, not overwhelmed, not overworked, and still have lives as recruiters?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Great question. So I'll start with the second one first because that's most important to me of the two. So those articles that you read, I will tell you, there's a lot of truth to the stress on Marine Corps recruiting. We tell Marines all the time, as a Marine, to serve, quite frankly, in every service, but in the Marine Corps especially, to serve as a sacrifice. It's going to take some time and it's a lot of energy and a lot of focus based upon our commitment to the team. But we try and do leaders. That's one of the reasons why we spend so much time selecting quality leaders to help develop the scaffolding and the support services available to help Marines do hard things, hard places on recruiting duty, and not necessarily succumb to those challenges. We'll never be able to eradicate the stress or those factors that are there, but what we do is invest in a lot of the total force fitness of what we can do with some of our unit readiness coordinators, reaching back from someone in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, contacting the headquarters down here at Marine Corps Recruit Depot San Diego, that we can make liaison with folks in that area to make sure that they have the support services available to them, whether it's through counseling services directly for the Marines, counseling services for the Marines and their families, giving them the time that they need to better prepare themselves. Because what we commit to the Marines and the commanders in the fleet, so no Marine joins the Marine Corps to become a recruiter. They come out to recruiting duty for 3 years, and we promise a Marine recruiter, or the fleet, that when that young man or woman comes back to you, they're a better Marine after 3 years of serving on this duty, which means we have to invest in the Marine leaders across the spectrum, enlisted Marines and our officers. So Total Force Fitness is focused a lot of time and wellness for our Marines and finding the available resources that are there. Our Commandant has made quality of life another priority of his in addition to recruiting. And so our service has certainly put the resources and the attention and the leadership to ensure that a proper scaffolding and services are available to our Marines on the duty. I went kind of long in that one because I believe in it, because I was one of those in 2009, 2012 at the deck plate level, going through the challenges the stressful environment of recruiting to make mission. But rest assured, what brought us through on the back end was we win, we don't fail. And back to your original question, your first question about FY26, or 7, 27, and 28, we anticipate an strength increase. All headwinds indicating we don't know yet. We haven't been specifically tasked. We have developed a growth plan already to get to 177,500 by 2030. So we're already planning and projecting to get to fiscal year 27 an increase. So one of the things that we're going to continue to do is the recruiters, the additional recruiters, are going to remain time now. We are done with structure changes for now, but also making sure the best leaders are selected to get out on the recruiting duty. And also what we like to do is when a Marine is assigned to recruiting duty, there are some that have a passion for it, that are really good at it, and can lead the next generation. So we try to recruit a number of temporary recruiters to remain in the recruiting force as career recruiters. That's our investment into the future force of recruiters who only come out to the duty for 36 months. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you.
Am I going to get the hook, or we got time for one more? Okay, one.
Good afternoon, sir.
How are you, ma'am?
Potential candidate applicant in the force. One of the questions I have is what factors led to the decision to eliminate the fall officer candidate school class for females? Additionally, does that create a gap between accession opportunities, increase the risk of attrition among the female prospective applicants?
Yeah, good question. So at Officer Candidate School, I have a couple years of experience there too. In order to maintain a number of officer candidates to instructors, we have to have, there's a minimum floor that the commanding officer sets to make sure that they can go through the training and not be excluded from other training opportunities. For instance, within a squad bay at Officer Candidate School, the males have to have, and females both are separated in the squad bay, but in order to run 24/7 fire watch to ensure that somebody's watching the duty, if you have less than the minimum number required, that means that candidate who is in that squad bay, whether males or females with fewer candidates, are likely going to be pulling duty more often, which is going to affect their ability to train, which is going to affect their ability to stay in training, which leads to a higher attrition. So the decision was primarily based on the number of applicants that we had in order to ship to Officer Candidate School to meet the minimum floor to ensure we don't disadvantage any particular platoon or candidate once they get to Officer Candidate School. Does that help?
Yes, sir. Been there, done that, got
you have,
dropped.
yep.
Trying to come back.
So we can talk about that separately, but yes. But does that answer your question though?
Aye,
Yes.
sir.
Okay. Well, look, again, I appreciate your time. I'll get off the stage. Thank you for your attention and enjoy your week.